openly and from across the stable yard, but they had not just picked that spot, standing in the full sun, to talk. Matt stroked Pips's nose, then after a moment began to examine the horse's eyes. A fellow in a leather vest came out of the stable, shoving a dung barrow up the street. Vannon walked over to peer into Pips's eye. Not looking at him, Matt said, "Could you reach the band?" "Maybe." Vannon frowned and lifted Pips's eyelid. "With a little luck, maybe. Hate to leave my horse, though." Matt nodded, looking closer at the eye. "Tell Talmanis I said to sit tight. I may be staying here a few days, and I don't want any bloody attempted rescue. Try to make it back here without being seen."
I'm about to, Oscar.
Vannon spat into the
I got
dust
a new
under Pips.
little dab rig I'm
"Man
testing
mixes
out.
with ice a day. He's bridled himself and put a saddle on his back. I'll be
Just
back
get
when
situated.
I can." Shaking his head, he strolled off into the
Get nice
crowd,
and
a fat,
comfortable.
rumpled man with a rolling walk who no one could suspect of being able to sneak. One of the
There we go.
squadmen cleared his throat hesitantly and stepped closer. "My lord,
Bad, and let's get
is
a
everything,
dab tool.
this is what you planned, isn't it, my lord?" "Right to the plan, Verdun," Matt said, patting Pips. He was headfirst in a sack and the strings tied tight. He had promised Rand to see Elaine safe to Caitlin,
Got a new
and he
little
could not leave without her.
Dr. Dabber.
And he could not go off and let
think
Egwene
it's
stretch her
XL.
neck on the chopping block either. It might be, light how it rankled, it might be that he was going to have to take Tom's advice. Try to keep those bloody women's bloody heads on their bloody shoulders by somehow helping them make this whole mad, impossible scheme actually work. While trying to keep his own neck in one
There
piece,
she's subscribed to
incidentally.
you there, Bower.
And that left out keeping Avienda from
Oscar.
Elaine's throat. Well, at the least, he could be around to get them away when it all fell apart. Small comfort that was. Everything is just bloody fine.
Elaine expected to find Avienda in the waiting room or maybe outside, but she hardly had to listen to discover why she was in neither place. There were two topics of conversation among the other Aes Sedai, and everyone was talking, with papers lying abandoned on the tables. Matt occupied most tongues. Even the servants and novices bustling about the waiting room paused in running errands to exchange words about him. He was Taviran.
Hey,
Was it
D-Man, how you
safe to let a
doing?
Taviran remain in Salidar?
I got me another
Had he
little
really been
portable
in the tower
dabber.
and simply allowed to go?
Or dab
Was
rig.
it true he commanded the Dragon-sworn army? Was he to be arrested for the atrocities they had heard of? Was it true he
I hope
came
all
from the same
well with
village
you
as the
and your
Dragon
family
Reborn
too,
and the
D-Man.
Almaden? There were rumors of
Can't
two
complain too
Taviran
much.
connected to the Dragon Reborn. Who was the second, and where could he be found?
Hey,
Maybe Matt
Christopher, how you
Coffin
doing?
knew. There seemed to be as many opinions as there were people to give them. There were two questions.
Salut Chris, j'espère que tu vas bien.
There were two questions Elaine expected to hear and did not. What did Matt want in Salidar, and how had Rand known where to send him? Nobody asked them, but here an Aes Sedai suddenly shifted her shawl as if cold, or gave a start when she realized someone had spoken to her. There a serving woman stared at nothing in the middle of the floor before coming to herself with a shake, or a novice darted frightened glances at the sisters. Matt was not quite a cat set among the pigeons, but he came close. Just the fact that Rand knew where they were seemed enough to set a chill. Avienda occasioned less comment, but the sisters could not help talking about her, and not only to change the subject. It was not every day that a wilder simply appeared on her own 2 feet, especially with such remarkable strength, and an Aiel besides. That last truly fascinated every sister. No Aiel had ever trained in the tower, and few Aes Sedai had ever entered the Aiel waste. A single question sufficed to learn where she was being held. Not held in name, but Elaine knew how Aes Sedai could be when they wanted a woman to become a novice. "She will be in white by nightfall," a Karen said confidently. A slim brown, she nodded for emphasis with almost every word. The 2 sisters with her nodded just as surely. Tisking under her breath, Elaine hurried into the street. Ahead of her, she could see Nynaeve practically trotting and looking over her shoulder so often that she was running into people. Elaine thought about catching up. She would not mind having company, but she was not about to run in this heat, concentration or no, and that seemed the only way.
Nice little chunk
Even
of wax.
so, she did lift her skirt slightly and hurried. Before she had gone 50 paces, she felt Brigitte coming closer and turned to see her running down the street. Arena was with her, but she stopped a little way off and folded her arms with a scowl. The woman was an impossible little wretch, and she certainly had not changed her opinions because Elaine really was Aes Sedai now. "I thought you should know," Brigitte said quietly. "I just heard that when we leave for Ebu Dar, Van Dien and Adelius are going too." "I see," Elaine murmured. It could be that the pair were going to join Merlin
yeah.
for some reason, though there were already 3 Aes Sedai at Tyland's court. Or maybe they had a mission of
Yeah,
their
that's
own
definitely
in
one of my
Ebu Dar.
good ones.
She did not believe either.
At least my
Arena
go-to
had her mind
was.
set, and so did the hall. Elaine and Nynaeve were to be accompanied by 2 real Aes Sedai as chaperones. She does understand she isn't going. Brigitte glanced the way Elaine was staring at Arena, then shrugged. She understands.
Before we do that, Dab, let's
She is
do
not
let's,
happy over
let me
it.
load this bowl up.
Myself, I can hardly wait to be gone. Elaine hesitated only a moment. She had promised to keep secrets, which she did not like, but she had not promised to stop trying to convince the other woman there was no need and no point. Brigitte, Egwene, no. Why not? Elaine had not had Brigitte for a warder long before she decided that when she bonded Rand, she would somehow make him promise to do as he was told, at least when it was important. Lately, she had decided on another provision. He was going to
Nice.
have to answer her questions. Brigitte answered when she chose, evaded when she chose, and sometimes just put on a stubborn face, as she did now. Tell me why not, and if it's a good reason, I'll never ask again. At first, Brigitte just glowered, but then she took Elaine's arm and very nearly hustled her to the mouth of an alley. No one passing by glanced at them twice, and Arena remained where she was, if darker of face than before. But Brigitte still looked around carefully and spoke in a whisper. Always when the wheel spun me out, I was born, lived, and died without ever knowing I was bound to the wheel. I only knew that in between, until I ran Riod. Sometimes I became known, even famous, but I was like everyone else, not somebody out of a legend. This time I was ripped out, not spun out. For the first time wearing flesh, I know who I am. For the first time other people can know too. Tom and Julian do. They say nothing, but I am sure. They don't look at me the way they do other people. If I said I was going to climb a glass mountain and
Oh, it's
kill a
not
giant
hash,
with my
it's-
bare
if I had
hands,
hash,
they'd
I would
just ask
smoke
if
it.
I needed any help on the way.
But
And they would not expect
what
me
I'm
to.
actually smoking in my bowl is
I don't
have wax,
understand,
but
Elaine said slowly.
I'm down
And
to
Brigitte sighed and let her head
smoking
hang.
roaches.
I don't know that I can live up to that. In other lives, I did what I had to, what seemed to be right.
But I'm about to
Enough
smoke
for
some
Marion or
wax.
Joanna or any woman. Now I'm Brigitte of the stories.
Now, this is another little
Everyone who
what is it,
knows will
Dr. Dabber
expect.
XS.
I feel like a feather dancer walking into a Tovan conclave.
I'll grab the box out here in
Elaine
a sec.
did not ask.
Let's see.
When Brigitte mentioned things from past lives, the explanations were usually more confusing than ignorance. That is nonsense, she said firmly, taking the other woman by the arms. I know, and I certainly don't expect you to kill any giants. Egwene doesn't either, and she already knows. As long as I don't admit it, Brigitte muttered. It's as if she didn't. Don't bother saying that's nonsense, too. I know it is, but that changes nothing.
Okay, let me
Then
get
what about this?
seated back again.
She is the Amerlin, and you are a warder. She deserves your trust, Brigitte. She needs it.
But it's
Are
a
you
Dr.
done with her
Dabber.
yet? Arena demanded from a pace away. If you're going to go away and
XS.
leave me, the least you can do is help me with my archery the way you said you would. I will think on it, Brigitte told Elaine quietly. Turning to Arena, she caught the woman's braid at the base of her neck. We will speak of archery, she said, pushing her up the street. But first we will speak of manners. Shaking her head, Elaine suddenly remembered Avienda and hurried on. The house was not far. It took her a moment to recognize Avienda. Elaine was used to seeing her in Cadinsor, with her dark reddish hair cut short, not in skirt and blouse and shawl with hair below her shoulders,
Just wait for
and
it
held back from her face by a folded kerchief.
to heat up.
At first glance, she did not appear to be in any difficulty. Sitting rather awkwardly in a chair, I am unused to chairs, she seemed to be peacefully sipping tea with 5 sisters in a circle in the sitting room. Houses that sheltered Aes Sedai had such things, though Elaine and Nynaeve were still in their cramped little room. At second glance, Avienda was casting hunted looks at the Aes Sedai over the rim of her tea. There was no time for a third glance. On sight of Elaine, Avienda jerked to her feet and brought her cup to the clean-swept floor. Elaine had seen few Aiel except in the Stone of Tyr, but she did know they hid their emotions, and Avienda did it very well. Only now, naked pain painted her face. I'm sorry, Elaine told the room smoothly, but I must take her away from you for a little while. Perhaps you can talk to her later. Several of the sisters hesitated on the brink of protest, though there should have been none. She was clearly the strongest in the room by far, except for Avienda, and none of the Aes Sedai was a sitter or part of Shiriam's council. She was very happy that Mirella was not there, since she lived in this house. Elaine had made her choice of green and been accepted, only to discover that Mirella was the head of the Green Ajah in Salidar. Mirella, who had not even been Aes Sedai 15 years. From things that had been said, Elaine knew there were Greens in Salidar who had worn the shawl at least 50, though not a one showed a gray hair. Had Mirella been there, all Elaine's strength would have counted for nothing if the head of her Ajah wanted to retain Avienda. As it was, only Shanna, a fat white who reminded Elaine of a fish, went as far as opening her mouth further, and she closed it again, though rather sullenly, when Elaine arched an eyebrow. The 5 were more than a bit tight-lipped, but Elaine ignored the tension. "Thank you," she said with a smile she did not feel. Avienda slung a dark bundle on her back, but hesitated until Elaine actually asked her to come. In the street, Elaine said, "I apologize for that. I'll see it does not happen again." She could manage that, she was sure. Or Egwene could, surely. "There are not many places to talk alone, I'm afraid. My room is rather hot this time of day. We could try to find some shade or have some tea if they haven't already filled you with it." Your room. It was not exactly curt, but plainly Avienda did not want to talk. Not yet. Abruptly, she darted to a passing cart filled with firewood and snatched out a branch meant to be broken for kindling, longer than her arm and thicker than her thumb. Rejoining Elaine, she began peeling it with her bread knife. The sharp blade shaved away smaller branches like a razor. The pain was gone from her face, and she seemed determined now. Elaine eyed her sideways as they walked. She would not believe Avienda meant her any harm.
That's a good one.
Whatever that lout Matt Cawthon said. Then again, she knew a little of J'ito. Avienda had explained some of it when they were in the stone together. Maybe Rand had said or done something. Maybe that bewildering labyrinth of honor and obligation required Avienda. It did not seem possible. But maybe... When they reached her room, she decided to bring it up first. Facing the other woman, and very deliberately not embracing Saidar, she said, "Matt claims you have come here to kill me." Avienda blinked. "Wetlanders always put everything backwards," she said wonderingly. Laying the stick on the foot of Nynaeve's bed, she put the belt knife beside it carefully. "My near sister Egwene asked me to watch Rand al'Thor for you, which I promised to do." Bundle and shawl went on the floor beside the door. "I have tow toward her, but greater to you." Unlacing her blouse, she pulled it over her head, then pushed her shift to her waist. I love Randall Thor, and once I let myself lie with him. I have tow, and I ask that you help me meet it. Turning her back, she knelt in the small space available. You may use the stick or the knife as you wish. The toe is mine, but the choice is yours. She tilted up her chin, stretching her neck. Her eyes were closed. Whichever you choose, I accept. Elaine thought her knees were going to buckle. Min had said the third woman would be dangerous. Avienda? Wait, she said she... with Rand? Her hand twitched toward the knife on the bed, and she folded her arms, trapping her hands. Get up, and put on your blouse. I am not going to hit you. Just a few times. She tightened her arms to hold her hands where they were. And I'm certainly not going to touch that knife. Please, put it away. She would have handed it to the other woman, but she was not certain she was safe to touch a weapon right then. You have no toe toward me. She believed that was the phrase. I love Rand, but I don't care that you love him too. The lie burned her tongue. Avienda had actually lain with him? Twisting around on her knees, Avienda frowned. I am not certain I understand. Are you proposing that we share him? Elaine, we are friends, I think, but we must be as first sisters if we are to be sister wives. It will take time to know if we can be that. Realizing her mouth was hanging open, Elaine closed it. I suppose it will, she said faintly. Min kept saying they would share him, but certainly not that way. Even the thought was indecent. It is a little more complicated than you know. There's another woman who loves him too. Avienda was on her feet so fast, she simply seemed to be one place, then the other. What is her name? Her green eyes blazed, and she had the knife in her hand. Elaine almost laughed. One moment talking about sharing, the next as fierce as fierce as me, she finished, not at all pleased with the thought. This could have been worse, much worse. It could have been Berylane. Since it had to be somebody, it might as well be Avienda, and I might as well deal with it instead of kicking my skirts like a child. Seating herself on the bed, she folded her hands in her lap. Do sheath that and sit down, Avienda. And please put on your blouse. I have a great deal to tell you. There is a woman, my friend, my near sister, named Min. Avienda did clothe herself, but a considerable time passed before she sat, and considerably more before Elaine could convince her that they should not combine to do Min in. She agreed to that at least. Reluctantly, she finally said, I must get to know her. I will not share him with a woman I cannot love as a first sister. That with a studying look at Elaine, who sighed. Avienda would consider sharing him with her. Min was ready to share him with her. Was she the only one of the three who was normal? By the map under her mattress, Min should be in Camelin soon, or maybe already was. She did not know what she wanted to have happen there, only that Min should use her viewings to help him, which meant Min had to stay close to him, while Elaine went to Abu Dar. Is anything in life ever simple, Avienda? Not when men are involved. Elaine was not sure which surprised her more, to find that she was laughing, or that Avienda was. Chapter 41. A Threat. Riding slowly through Camelin under a baking mid-morning sun, Min really saw little of the city. She hardly noticed the people and sedan chairs, wagons, and coaches that clogged the streets, except to guide her bay mare around them. One of her dreams had always been to live in a great city and travel to strange places, but today colorful towers covered in glittering tiles and sweeping vistas, as the street rounded a hill, passed all but unseen. Clumps of Aiels striding through the crowds with space opening around them got a second glance, and so did patrols of hawk-nosed, often bearded men on horseback. but only because they reminded her of the stories they had begun hearing while still in Murundi. Marana had been angered by those, and by the charred evidence of Dragonsworn they had come on twice, but Min thought some of the other Aes Sedai were worried. The less said about what they thought of Rand's amnesty, the better. At the edge of the plaza in front of the royal palace, she drew Wild Rose's rein and blotted her face carefully with a lace-edged handkerchief that she tucked back up her coat sleeve. Only a few people dotted the great oval, perhaps because Aiel guarded the open main gates of the palace. More Aiel stood on marble balconies or glided across high, colonnaded walks like leopards. The White Lion of Andor stirred in a breeze above the tallest of the palace domes. Another crimson flag flew from one of the spires, a little lower than the white dome, lifted just enough by the breeze for her to make out the ancient symbol of Aes Sedai, black and white. Those Aiel made her glad she had refused the offer of a pair of warders as escort. She suspected Aiel and warders might strike sparks. Well, it had not been precisely an offer, and she had refused by sneaking away an hour before time by the clock on the inn mantelpiece. Marana was from Caemlyn, and when they arrived before dawn, she took them straight to what she said was the finest inn in the new city. It was not the Aiel who kept Min sitting there, however. Not entirely, though she had heard all sorts of terrible stories about black-veiled Aiel. Her coat and breeches were the finest, softest wool that could be found in Salidar, in a pale rose, with tiny blue and white flowers embroidered on lapels and cuffs, and down the outsides of the legs. Her shirt was cut like a boy's, too, but in cream silk. In Baerlon, after her father died, her aunts had tried to make her into what they had called a decent, proper woman, though maybe her Aunt Myron had understood that after 10 years running about the mines in boys' clothes, it might be too late to stuff her into dresses. They had tried even so, and she had fought them as stubbornly as she refused to learn to wield a needle. Aside from that unfortunate episode serving tables at the Miners' Rest, a rough place, but she had not stayed long. Rana, Jan, and Myron had seen to that emphatically when they found out, and no matter that she was 20 then. Aside from that one time, she had never worn a dress willingly. Now she was thinking that maybe she should have had one made instead of this coat and breeches. A dress in silk, cut snug at the bodice and low, and... "You'll have to take me as I am," she thought, twitching the reins irritably. "I'm not changing for any man." Only her clothes would have been as plain as any farmer's not that long ago. Her hair had not been in ringlets almost to her shoulders, and a small voice whispered, "You'll be whatever you think he wants you to be." She kicked it down as hard as she had ever kicked any stableman who tried to cut rough, and healed Wild Rose only a little more gently. She hated the very idea of women being weak when it came to men. There was just one problem. She was fairly certain she was going to find out just what it was like very soon now. Dismounting in front of the palace gates, she patted the mare, to tell her she had not meant the kick, while eyeing the Aiel uncertainly. Half were women, all but one considerably taller than she. The men towered like Rand, most of them, and some even more. Everyone was watching her. Well, they seemed to be watching everything, but definitely her as well, and not one blink that she could see. With those spears and bucklers, the bows on their backs and quivers at their hips, the heavy knives, they looked ready to kill. Those black strips of cloth hanging down onto their chests must be the veils. She had heard Aiel would not kill you without covering their faces. I hope that's so. She addressed herself to the shortest of the women. Framed by bright red hair as short as Min's used to be, her tanned face might as well have been carved from wood, but she was even a little shorter than Min. "I've come to see Rand al'Thor," Min said, a trifle unsteadily. "The dragon we burned?" Did none of them ever? "My name is Min. He knows me, and I have an important message for him." The red-haired woman turned to the other Aiel, gesticulating quickly with her free hand. The rest of the women laughed as she turned back. "I will take you to him, Min. But if he does not know you, you will leave much faster than you go in." Some of the Aiel women laughed at that, too. I am called Enila. He knows me, Min told them, flushing. She had a pair of nails in her coat sleeves that Tom Marilyn had showed her how to use, but she had the feeling this woman could take them away and peel her with them. An image flickered above Enila's head and was gone. A wreath of some sort. Min had no idea what it meant. Am I supposed to take my horse in, too? I don't think Rand wants to see her. To her surprise, some of the Aiel chuckled, men and women, and Enila's lips twitched as if she wanted to. A man came to take Wild Rose. Min thought he was Aiel too, despite the downcast eyes and white robe, and she followed Enila through the gates, across a broad courtyard and into the palace proper. It was something of a relief to see servants in red and white livery scurrying along the tapestry-lined corridors, warily eyeing the Aiel who also walked the halls, but no more so than they might a strange dog, really. She had begun to think she would find the palace filled with none but Aiel, Rand surrounded by them, maybe dressed in coat and breeches all in shades of brown and gray and green, staring at her without blinking. Before tall, wide doors carved with lions and standing open, Enila halted, wiggling her hand quickly at the Aiel on guard. They were all women. One, flaxen-haired and considerably taller than most men, waggled fingers back. "Wait here," Enila said, and went in. Min took one step after her, and a spear was casually held in her path by the flaxen-haired woman.
This one got look at dragon egg.
Not casually, but Min did not care. She could see Rand. He sat on a great gilded throne that seemed made entirely of dragons, in a red coat worked heavily with gold, holding some sort of green and white tasseled spearhead of all things. Another throne stood on a tall pedestal behind him, gilded also, but with a lion picked out in white gemstones against red. The lion throne, so the rumors said. At that moment he could have been using it for a footstool for all she cared. He looked tired. He was so beautiful her heart ached. Images danced around him continuously. With Aes Sedai and warders, that deluge was something she tried to escape. She could not tell what they meant any more often than with anyone else, but they were always there. With Rand she had to make herself see them, because otherwise she would just stare at his face. One of those images she had seen every time she saw him. Countless thousands of sparkling lights like stars or fireflies rushed into a great blackness, trying to fill it up, rushed in and were swallowed. There seemed to be more lights than she had ever seen before, but the darkness swallowed them at a greater rate too. And there was something else, something new, an aura of yellow and brown and purple that made her stomach clench. She tried viewing the nobles facing her. Surely that was what they were, in all those fine embroidered coats and rich silk gowns, but there was nothing to see. That was true of most people most of the time, and when she did see something, most often she had no notion of what they were told. Even so, she narrowed her eyes, straining. If she could make out just one image, one aura, it might be a help to him. From the stories she had heard since entering Andor, he could use all the help he could find. With a heavy sigh, she gave it up, finally. Squinting and straining did no good unless there was something to see in the first place. Suddenly she realized the nobles were withdrawing. Rand was on his feet, and Enila was waving, motioning her to enter. Rand was smiling. Min thought her heart might burst out of her chest. So this was what it felt like for all those women she had laughed at, throwing herself at a man's feet. No, she was not a giddy girl. She was older than he. She had had her first kiss while he still thought getting out of tending sheep was the most fun in the world. She liked, please, don't let my knees give way.
Tossing the dragon scepter down carelessly where he had been sitting, Rand bounded from the dais in one leap and rushed down the grand hall. As soon as he reached Min, he caught her under the arms and swung her into the air and around before Dylan and the others were gone.
The whole thing is...
Some of the nobles stared, and were welcome to, for all of him.
Let's see, let me grab the
Light,
two biggest
Min, but it's good to
pieces.
see your face, he laughed. Considerably better than Dylan's stony features or Alorian's. But if Aemlyn and Darathel and Pelavar and Luan and all of
And
them
there's a couple
had
other
everyone
pieces
proclaimed
that's in
their
here.
joy that Elaine was on her way to Camelin instead of staring at him with doubt or even liar in their eyes,
That and
he would have been as overjoyed to see Min. When
I
he put her
packed
feet
some
back
of
on the
that.
floor, she sagged against his
Tried to
chest,
use my
clutching his
nectar
arms
collector.
and breathing hard. I'm sorry, he said. I didn't mean to make you dizzy. It's just that I really am glad to see you. Well, you did make me dizzy, you wool-headed sheep-herder, she mumbled against his chest. Pushing herself
Yeah, I'm
away,
not
she
to do
glared up
that.
at him through long lashes. I had a very long ride. I
I
arrived in
can't
the middle
afford
of the
to
night,
do that.
or might as well,
That
and you
ounce,
tossed me
that's
around like
what
a
I
sack
used
of
to get
oats.
to smoke
Did
on
you
for
never
a month.
learn any manners? Woolhead, he laughed softly. Min, you can name me a liar, but I've actually missed hearing you call me that. She did not call him anything. She merely peered up at him, the glare gone completely.
And I only get a check
Her eyelashes did seem longer
once a
than he
month
remembered.
for my disability, and
Realizing
the
where
little
they
bit that's
were,
left
he took her
extra
hand.
is what I
A throne
buy
room was
my,
no place for
wax
meeting
with him.
old friends.
I make that last me the
Come on,
month.
Min. We can have some cool punch in my sitting room. Samara, I am going to my apartments. You can send everybody away. Samara
I'm not
did
trying
not
to
look happy
waste it.
about it, but she dismissed all the maidens except
I'd
for
rather
herself
smoke
and
it, get my
Anaya.
money's worth.
Both looked a bit sullen, which he did not understand. He had allowed Samara to gather somebody inside the palace in the first place only because Dylan and the others were coming. Bashir was out at his horseman's camp north of the city for the same reason. Maidens for a reminder, Bashir because there could be too many reminders. He hoped the two maidens were not planning on any mothering. They took turns as his guards, more than their share, it seemed to him, but Nandera was as adamant as Sulin had been when it came to him saying who specifically was to do what. He could command Farderai's Mai, but he was not a maiden, and the other was none of his business. Min studied the tapestries as he led her along the corridor by the hand. She peered at inlaid chests and tables, at golden bowls and tall vases of
That's
seafolk
nice.
porcelain in niches. She examined Anila and Samara head to toe 3 times each. But she neither looked at him nor spoke a word.
Yeah, this one,
His hand engulfed hers, and he could feel the pulse in her wrist racing to beat horses. He hoped she was not really angry and whirled about. To his great relief, Samara and Anila
that's about
took
how much
places
I
on
pay
either
for
side
my
of
wax
his door,
too.
though they
It's
both
about
looked at him when he asked for
100
punch,
to
and he had to repeat himself.
125 an ounce.
In the sitting room,
But
he took
this
off
one-
his coat and tossed it over a chair.
Let's see if I can
Sit,
show
Min,
you.
sit. Rest and relax. The punch will be here shortly. You have to
But
tell
this
me
one was
everything.
actually
Where you've been, how you got here,
cheaper than I usually
why
pay.
you arrived in the night.
It was
It isn't safe traveling at night, Min. Now less than ever.
this one was
I'll give you the best rooms in the
85.
palace. Well, the second best. These are the best. And an IU escort to take
Either
you
I
wherever
think
you
it was
want.
80 or 85 that I paid
Any
for
bully
this
boy
one.
or strong arm will doff
But
his
I
cap
usually
and duck
end up
his
paying,
head if he doesn't run right up the side of a
100.
building to get away.
But that's
For a moment, he
usually
thought she might laugh, standing there by the door.
what I
but
have
instead,
left
she
for
drew a
my
deep
check
breath
at
and took a letter
the
from her
after I
pocket.
pay my bills and rent and
I-
whatnot.
Can't tell you where I came from. I promised Rand.
And I usually don't
But
get
Elaine is there. and
money any other time
Celadar,
during the month, so
he said, and smiled at the way her
I
eyes
tend to have
widened.
to make my
I know a few things,
my
Min.
wax
Maybe more than some think I do.
last for the most part.
I see that you do, she said faintly. She pushed the letter into his hands, then
If I
backed
was able
away
to
again.
afford it,
Her voice firm.
oh hell
as she
yeah, I'd
added,
definitely get
I swore I would give that to you
have
first off.
a little bit more.
Go ahead and read it. He recognized the seal, a lily in dark yellow wax, and Elaine's flowing hand in his name, and he hesitated before opening it. Clean breaks were best, and he had made one, but with the letter in his hand, he could not stop himself.
No shit.
He
Could I
read,
have
then
this?
sat down atop his coat
And I
read
actually
again.
have a
It was
a
certainly
bigger
short.
Dr. Dabber. I have
Rand,
the Dr.
I
Dabber
have made my
switch, the
feelings
real
clear
big
to you.
one.
Know that they have not changed.
But my
I hope that you
the
feel for
carb
me
cap
what
I
I
have
feel
on
for
it
you.
broke.
Min
Because
can
it had a
help
carb
you
cap.
if you will only listen to her.
Excuse me.
I love her like a
similar
sister,
to this,
and hope you love
with
her
like
as I
that
do.
end at the bottom,
Elaine.
and my carb cap broke, so I can't
Her
use
ink must have been
my
running out
bigger
because
Dr.
the last
Dabber,
lines
so
were a hurried
I gotta
scrawl,
use either this
quite unlike the elegance of the rest.
or
Min had been sidling and twisting her head, trying to read the letter without being too obvious. But when he
My
lifted
nectar
himself to
collector.
pull his coat out, the fat little man Angriol was in the pocket. She scurried back again. Do women all try to drive a man crazy? He muttered. What? He stared at the letter, talking half to himself. Elaine is so beautiful I can't help staring, but half the time I don't know whether she wants me to kiss her or kneel at her feet. Truth to tell,
with those I
sometimes I
have,
did
I
want to
tend to-
kneel and worship the
my
light
wax
hand me.
lasts about a month.
She says here I know how she feels. 2 letters she's written me before this, one full of love,
shit,
the other
4
saying she never
months?
wanted
Hell
the sight
yeah.
of me again. The times
But
I've
with
sat
this
wishing
one,
the first one was true, and the other some sort
This
of joke
Dr.
or
Dabber
mistake.
versus
Or...
my
And
bigger
Avienda.
Dr. Dabber switch.
She's beautiful too, but every day with her was a battle. No
my
kisses
switch,
from her,
I go
not
through
anymore,
wax a lot more
and
because
no
I can load
doubts how she
a
feels.
lot more in the bucket. It
She was
has.
even happier to get away from me
And
than I was
fucking
to see her go.
Get a good rip.
Only I keep expecting to see her when I
But
turn
with
around.
this one,
And when she isn't there, it's as if
I
something
put-
inside me is missing.
less in
I
it
actually miss the battle,
than
and there are moments when I find
Excuse
myself
me.
thinking,
I did on
There
my
are things worth
Dr. Dabber
fighting for.
switch. And I can
something
get,
in silence made him look up.
I
She
can
was
hit
staring
like
at him
2
with
or
a
3
face as
times
blank as an eye
with
said
the
I.
same dab that I put in there.
Did nobody ever tell
Taking
you
a
it isn't
couple
polite
rips
to
that I
talk
do
to one
when I
woman about
first hit
another?
it, then when
Her
I do
voice
it
was
again.
absolutely flat.
But
Much less 2 other
with
women.
this, I see my wax lasting
Man, you're a friend,
longer
he protested.
than what it
I don't
did
think
when
of
my
you as a woman.
switch was
It
working.
was the wrong thing to
Or
say.
it still works. I just got a
He knew
broken
it as
carb
soon as
cap,
the
so it
words
doesn't
left his
really
mouth.
hit that good.
Oh.
Yeah, but with this, I see
Tossing
myself
back her coat, she placed her
having my
hands on her
wax
hips.
last a lot
It was
longer.
not the all-too-familiar angry pose. Her wrists were twisted so her fingers pointed up, and somehow that made it very different. She stood with one knee bent, and that... For the first
A
time, he
loadable
really
pin.
saw her.
Yeah, some of them pins
Not
actually
just
pretty
men,
good.
but the way she looked. Not the usual plain brown coat and breeches, but pale red and embroidered. Not the usual rough-cut hair that barely covered her ears, but ringlets brushing her neck. Do I look
I used to
like
have
a boy?
a couple of.
Man, do I look
pins.
like a man?
I actually
A
gave
horse?
the pen I had
In
to
one quick
to the
stride, she
neighbor,
reached him and plumped herself down in his lap.
and that one
Man,
was
he said, aghast. What are you doing? Convincing you I'm a woman,
that one was a
bullhead.
Yokan XL.
Don't I look like a woman? Don't
It
I
had adjustable
smell
airflow,
like a woman?
and it
She
had
smelled faintly of flowers.
4
Nobody noticed.
quartz coils.
Don't I feel?
And that
well,
one,
enough of
that one ripped pretty good.
Answer
but
the
that was
question,
a loadable
sheep
one.
herder. It was the sheep herder and wool head that stilled his alarm. The truth was, she felt remarkably nice sitting there. But she was Min, who thought he was a country boy with hay in his hair and not very much common sense. Like Min, I know you're a woman. I didn't mean any insult. You're a friend, too. It's just that I feel comfortable
And
with
then
you.
I have
It doesn't matter if I look like a
these.
fool with you. I can say things to you I wouldn't say to anybody else, not even Matt or Perrin. When I'm around you, all the knots unwind. All the tightness in my shoulders I don't even feel till it goes. Do you see, Min? I like being around you. I've missed you. Holding her arms, she looked at him sideways, frowning. Her leg twitched. If her foot had reached the floor, she would have been tapping it. All that about Elaine and this Avienda. Who is she, by the way? Sounds to me as if you love them both. Oh, stop jerking about. You owe me some answers, saying I'm not. Just answer me.
And this one's
Do you love both
2
of them?
gram, and it has 2 different flavors.
Maybe I do, he said
You got
slowly.
one there,
Might help me, I
and
think
then-
maybe I do.
one there.
Does that make me a lecher min or just a greedy fool? Her mouth opened and
Like you
closed.
just
She
hit 'em.
tossed her head angrily and compressed her lips.
One at a
He hurried
time.
on before she could tell him which one she had picked to fit him. He did not really want to hear it from her. It hardly matters now anyway.
Or
It is done with. I sent Avienda away, and I will not let her come back.
Both
I
at
won't
the
let
same
myself
time.
within a mile of her or Elaine. 10 miles if I can help it. For the love of... Why, Rand? What gives you the right to make a choice like that for them? Me, can't you see? I'm a target. Any woman I love becomes a target, too. Even if the arrow is aimed at me, it could hit her. It could be aimed at her. Breathing out heavily, he leaned back with his arms on the rose-carved chair arms. She twisted a little, studying him with the most serious expression he'd ever seen on her face. Min was always smiling, always a little amused by everything. Just as well she was not now.
Let's load
He was
this with
deadly
some of my
serious
other
himself.
stuff.
Land told me he and I are alike in some ways, and it's true. He said there are men who radiate death. Himself, me.
This has some
When a man like that falls in
sugar
love,
wax
the
too.
best gift he can give her is to put as much distance as possible between himself and her. You see that, don't you? What I see... She was silent for a moment. Very well. I'm your friend. And I am glad you know it. But don't bother thinking I will give up. I will convince you I am not a man or a horse. Min, I said I... Oh, no, sheepherder, not good enough. She wriggled around on his lap in a way that made him clear his throat and pinned a finger against his chest. I want tears in your eyes when you say it. I want drool on your
That
chin and a
cleaners, give me
stammer
1
in your
second.
voice. You needn't think I won't make you pay. Rand could not help laughing. Min, it really is good to have you here. All you see is a mudfoot from the 2 rivers, isn't it? Her mood changed lightning quick. I see you, Rand, she said, strangely quiet. I see you. Clearing her throat, she arranged herself primly, hands on knees. If it was possible to be prim, sitting as she was, anyway. I might as well get on with why I came. Apparently you know about Salidar. That is going to raise a few eyebrows, I tell you. What you probably do not know is that I didn't come alone. There's an embassy from Salidar in Camelin to see you. Luce Theron muttered, thunder in the distance. Mention of Aes Sedai always roused him since Alana and the bonding, if not as much as being around Taim. Even with Luce Theron grumbling, Rand very nearly smiled. He had suspected as soon as Min handed in the letter from Elaine. Confirmation was almost as good as proof that they were frightened, as he thought. What else could they be, rebels driven to hiding right on the edge of White Cloak power? Very likely wishing they knew how to creep back into the White Tower, too, chewing their fingers over how to wriggle back into Elida's good graces. From what he knew of Elida, they had small chance, and they had to know it better than he. If they had sent an embassy to the Dragon Reborn, to a man who could channel, then they must be all but ready to accept his protection. This was not like Elida, who apparently thought he could be bought, and likely kept in a wicker cage like a song sparrow. Egwene's nebulous promises of Aes Sedai who supported him were about to be fulfilled. Who came with you? He asked. Maybe I know her. He did not really know any Aes Sedai except Moraine, who was dead, but he had met a few. If she was one of those, it might make things a little harder. He really had been Min's farm boy back then, ready to flinch if an Aes Sedai looked at him. There's more than one, Rand. Actually, there are 9. He gave a start, and she went on quickly. It is meant for an honor, Rand. 3 times what they'd send a king or queen. Mirana, she's in charge. She's Greyadja. Mirana will come here alone this afternoon, and no more than 1 at a time will come anywhere near you unless you feel comfortable. They took rooms at the Crown of Roses in the new city. They practically took it over, with all the warders and servants. Mirana sent me first because I know you, to smooth the way. They don't mean you any harm, Rand, I'm sure of it. Of viewing Min, or your opinion? It seemed odd to be carrying on a serious conversation with a woman perched on his knee, but she was Min, after all. That made it different. He just had to keep reminding himself. My opinion, she admitted reluctantly. Rand, I viewed every one of them every day all the long way from Salidar. If they intended any harm, I would have to have seen something. I can't believe nothing would show in that time. Shifting, she gave him a worried look that quickly changed to a determined firmness. I might as well tell you something else while I'm about it. I saw an aura around you in the throne room. Aes Sedai are going to hurt you. Women who can channel, anyway. It was all confused. I'm not sure about the Aes Sedai part. But it might happen more than once. I think that's why it seemed all scrambled. He looked at her silently, and she smiled. I like that about you, Rand. You accept what I can do and what I cannot. You don't ask me if I'm sure or when it's going to happen. You never ask for more than I know. Well, I am to ask one thing, Min. Can you be sure these Aes Sedai in your viewing aren't the Aes Sedai you came with? No, she said simply. That was one thing he liked. She never tried to evade. I have to be careful, Lews Therin whispered intently. Even these half-trained girls can be dangerous with 9 of them. I must, Rand thought firmly. A moment of confusion from Lews Therin, and then he fled back to the shadowed recesses. He always did now, if Rand spoke to him. The only problem was that Lews Therin seemed to be seeing and hearing more, and intending to act on it. There had not been another incident of his trying to see Sayadine, but Rand was careful now. The man wanted Rand's mind and body for his own. Thought they would. And if he managed to gain control even once, Rand was not certain it would not be just that way. Lews Therin Telemann walking and speaking, while Rand al'Thor was only a voice in his head. Min said anxiously. I'm on your side if it comes to sides. It might, a little. They think I'll tell them what you say. I won't, Rand. They just want to know how to deal with you, what to expect. But I'll not tell one word you don't want me to. And if you ask me to lie, I will. They do not know about my viewings. Those are yours, Rand. You know I will read anyone you say, including Marana and the rest. He forced the snarl from his face, made sure his voice was mild. Calm yourself, Min. I know you are on my side. That was simple truth. Suspecting Min would be like suspecting himself. Lews Therin was dealt with for the moment. It was time to deal with this Marana and her embassy. Tell them they can come 3 at a time. That was what Lews Therin had advised in Caria. No more than 3 at once. Rand seemed to believe he could handle 3 Aes Sedai. He seemed more than a little contemptuous of those who called themselves Aes Sedai now. But what had been a limit in Caria was different here. Marana wanted him calmed and smoothed down before even 1 Aes Sedai came near. Let her chew on an invitation for 3 to begin, and think what it might mean. Aside from that, none are to enter the inner city without my permission, and they aren't to try channeling around me. Tell them that, Min. I'll know the moment they take hold of the source, and I will not be pleased. Tell them. They aren't going to be very pleased either, sheepherder, she said dryly. But I will tell them. A crash whipped Rand's head around. Sulin stood just inside the door in her red and white dress, her face so suffused with blood that the scar on her cheek stood out even paler than usual. Her white hair had grown since she put on the livery, but it was still shorter than any of the servants. Mistress Harfor had had it made into a close cap of curls. Sulin hated that. At her feet was a silver tray bordered in worked gold with silver-chased golden goblets lying on their sides. The wine pitcher rocked a last time as he looked, and miraculously stopped upright, though there appeared to be as much wine punch on tray and carpet as there could be remaining in the pitcher. Min was halfway into scrambling to her feet when he caught her by the waist and pulled her back down. Time enough and more to drive home that he was done with Avienda, and Min would not mind helping. In fact, after a moment of resistance, she leaned into him and put her head on his chest. "Sulin," he said, "a good servant does not toss trays about. Now pick it up and do as you're supposed to." Staring at him darkly, she all but quivered. Figuring out how to let her meet her toe while discharging at least some of his obligation to her had been little short of brilliant. Sulin cared for his rooms now, and fetched and carried only for him. She hated it, of course, especially that he saw her doing it every day, but she no longer broke her back scrubbing floors all over the palace or hauling endless streams of heavy water buckets for laundry. He suspected she would rather every Aiel this side of the dragon wall saw her shame than allow him to, but he had eased her labors notably, eased his conscience somewhat, and if having to work for him made her decide her toe was met sooner, all to the good. She belonged in cotton sore carrying spears, not in livery folding bed linens. Picking up the tray, she stalked across the room and pushed it roughly onto an ivory inlaid table. As she started to turn away, he said, "This is Min, Sulin. She's my friend.
Put this
She doesn't
over
know
here.
Aiel ways,
I don't want to drop it.
and I would take it amiss should anything untoward happen to her." It had just occurred to him that the maidens might have their own view of him sending away Avienda and holding another woman almost as soon as she was gone. Their own view and their own way of dealing with it. "In fact, if any harm comes to her, I'll consider it done to me." "Why should any but Avienda wish to harm this woman?" Sulin said grimly. "She gave too much time to dreaming over you, and not enough to teaching you what you should know." Giving herself a shake, she growled, "My Lord Dragon." He thought it was supposed to be a murmur. She nearly fell over twice in her curtsy before she was upright again, and she slammed the door on her way out. Min twisted her head to look up at him. "I don't think I have ever seen a maid like Rand. I believe she'd have stabbed you if she had a knife." "Kick me, maybe," he chuckled, "but never stab. She thinks I am her long-lost brother." Confusion clouded Min's eyes. He could see 100 questions rising.
Be right
"It is a
back.
long story. I will tell you another time." Part of it, he would. Nobody was ever going to know what he had to put up with from Enila and Sumara and a few others. Well, the maidens all knew already, but no one else. Mullane entered in the Aiel way, which was to say she put her head in at the door, looked around, and then followed with the rest of her. He had never puzzled out what would make an Aiel decide not to come in. Chiefs, wise ones, and maidens had walked in on him in small clothes, in his bed, his bath. Coming closer, the sun-haired wise one settled herself cross-legged on the carpet a few paces in front of him in a clatter of bracelets and arranged her skirts around her with care. Green eyes regarded Min neutrally. This time Min made no effort to get up. In fact, from the way she was lying against him, head pressed against his chest, breathing slowly, he was not sure she might not be falling asleep. After all, she had said she had reached Camelin in the night. Suddenly, he became conscious of his hand fitted in the hollow of her waist, and moved it firmly to the arm of the chair. She sighed almost regretfully, and snuggled against him, going to sleep without a doubt. "I have news," Mullane said, "and I am uncertain which is the most important. Egwene has gone from the tents. She goes to a place called Salidar, where there are Aes Sedai. These are the Aes Sedai who may uphold you. At her asking, we did not speak to you of them before. But now I will tell you, they are froward, undisciplined, contentious, and full of themselves beyond reason." Her tone was heated toward the end, and her head was thrust forward. So one of the Dreamwalkers in Carian had spoken to Mullane in her dreams. That was about all he knew of the Dreamwalker's skills, and while it could have been useful, they were seldom willing to put it at his disposal. What was different was all that about froward and so forth. Most Aiel behaved as if they thought Aes Sedai might strike them, believed they would deserve it if so, and intended to take the blow without flinching. Even wise ones spoke of Aes Sedai respectfully, if at all. Clearly a few things had changed. All he said, though, was, "I know." If Mullane had any intention of telling him why, she would without his asking. If she did not, asking would get no answers. About Egwene and Salidar, too. There are 9 from Salidar in Caemlyn right now. Min here came with them. Min stirred on his chest and murmured something. Lews Therin was grumbling again, just too low to make out. And Rand was glad of the distraction. Min felt good. She would be offended to the sky if she knew. Then again, considering her promise to make him pay, she might laugh. Maybe. She could be Quicksilver at times. Mullane showed no surprise at his knowledge, not even shifting her shawl. Since marrying Bale, she seemed to have calmed was not quite the right word. It was much too placid for Mullane. Grown less excitable. That was my second news. You must be wary of them, Randall Thor, and use a firm hand. They will respect nothing else. Most definitely a change. You have 2 daughters, Min murmured. Twins like mirrors. If Mullane had been unsurprised before, she made up for it now. Her eyes went wide, and she gave a start that nearly lifted her from the floor. "How could you—" she began incredulously, then stopped to gather herself. Even so, she went on in a breathless voice. "I myself was uncertain I was with child until this morning. How could you know?" Min did get up then, giving him a look he knew all too well. It was his fault for some reason. She was not entirely without flaws, if small ones. Fussing with her coat, she looked everywhere except at Mullane, and when her gaze fell on him again, it was a variation of the first look. He had gotten her into this. It was up to him to get her out. "It is all right, Min," he said. "She's a wise one, and I expect she knows things that would curl your hair." Except that already was curly. How did women do that, anyway? "I'm sure she will promise to keep your secret, and you can trust her promise." Mullane almost stumbled over her tongue, promising. Just the same, Rand received another look before Min sat down beside Mullane. Reproachful, maybe. How did she expect him to get her out of it? Mullane would not forget because he asked, but she would keep a promise and a secret. She had kept enough from him. For all her reluctance, once Min began, she gave a much fuller explanation than she had ever given him at one time, perhaps helped by the other woman's constant questions and Mullane's changing attitude as well. It was as if Mullane began to feel that Min's ability made her an equal of sorts, not at all a wetlander. "It is remarkable," Mullane said at last, "like interpreting the dream without dreaming. 2, you say, both girls. Bale will be so pleased. Dorinda has given him 3 sons, but we both know he would like a daughter." Min blinked and gave her head a hard shake. Of course, she could not know about sister wives. From there, the 2 of them passed quickly on to childbirth itself. Neither had ever borne a child, but each had helped midwives. Rand cleared his throat loudly. It was not that any of the details bothered him. He had helped ewes lamb, mare's foal, and cow's calf. What was irritating was that they sat there with their heads together as though he had ceased to exist. Neither looked around until he cleared his throat again, loud enough that he wondered whether he had strained something. Mullane leaned closer to Min and spoke in a whisper that could have been heard in the next room. "Men always faint. And always at the worst possible time," Min agreed in the same tone. What would they think if they could have seen him in Matt's father's barn, blood and birthing fluids to his shoulders and 3 ribs cracked, where he had been kicked because the mare had never foaled before and was frightened? A fine colt that had been, and the mare had not kicked at all the next time. "Before I faint," he said wryly, joining them on the carpet, "perhaps one of you would like to say some more about the Aes Sedai?" He would have stood up or sat on the floor before this, had his lap not been full. Among the Aiel, only chiefs had chairs, and a chief's chair was only used for things like pronouncing judgments or receiving the submission of an enemy. Both women were suitably chastened. Neither said anything, but there was ample shifting of shawl, adjusting of coat, and not quite meeting his eye. All that vanished once they got down to talking. Min held tenaciously to her opinion that the Aes Sedai from Saladar meant no harm to Rand and might give aid, suitably handled, which was with all respect in public, and in private her reporting to Rand every whisper she overheard. "I'm not being a traitor, you understand, Mullane. I knew Rand before any Aes Sedai except Moraine, really. And the truth of it is, he took my loyalty long before she died." Mullane did not think Min a traitor, quite the contrary, and seemed to think even better of her. Wise ones did have their own version of the Aiel view of spies, but she argued that, with notable exceptions, Aes Sedai could be trusted as far as Shido, which was to say not until they had been taken captive and made Gaishang. She did not exactly suggest captivity for the Aes Sedai at the Crown of Roses, but she did not miss far. "How can you trust them, Randall Thor? I think they have no honor, except for Egwene Alvir, and she—" Mullane twitched her shawl again. "When an Aes Sedai shows me she has as much honor as Egwene, I will trust her, and not before." For his part, Rand listened more than he spoke, and, saying no more than a dozen or so words, learned a great deal. Answering Mullane's arguments, Min ran through the embassy name by name, listing what each woman had said about support for Rand, and in truth admitting that all was not exactly rosy. Mirana Ambry and Karen Stang, of Blue, were both Andoran, and for all that Aes Sedai supposedly forsook all allegiances save the White Tower, perhaps because they were estranged from the Tower, they worried that Rand sat in Caemlyn and might have murdered Morghese. Rathella Sindal, also Blue Aja, might be pleased with the changes Rand had made in Tyr, where once channeling had been outlawed and a girl found able to learn was hurried out of the country. But she said little, and Morghese worried her too. Sioned Trigun, a green, mulled over every rumor from her native Kyrian, and kept her own counsel. And Fealdrin Harella, the second green sister, sometimes compared Dragonsworn atrocities in Altara and Murundi to what Dragonsworn had done in Taraban, refusing even to talk about the fact that civil war had ripped her land apart before the first man had sworn to the dragon there. No matter how Mullane pressed, though, Min insisted that every one of those Aes Sedai acknowledged Rand to be the Dragon Reborn, and asked her most carefully all through the journey from Saladar what he was like and how he could be best approached without either offending or frightening him. Rand grunted at that they were worried about frightening him, but Mullane began insisting that if most of the women in the embassy had so much reason to be against Rand, then the embassy as a whole surely could not be trusted far enough to fetch dung for the fire. Min spared him an apologetic grimace and rushed on. Arid Daman had seen as much of Dragonsworn as Taraban, as well as its own civil war, but Demira Ereth of the Raja only talked of two things, really. Meeting Rand, and the rumor that he had started some sort of school in Kyrian. No man who started a school could be all bad in Demira's eyes. Berenicia Morsad, a yellow sister from Shinar, had heard from Shinarans in Saladar that Rand had been received in Faldara by the great captain Lord Agilmar Jagad, an honor that seemed to carry considerable weight with her. Lord Agilmar would hardly have received a ruffian, a fool, or a scoundrel. It weighed almost as heavily with Masuri Sakawa. She was a brown from Arafel, which bordered Shinar. Finally, there was Valinda Nathanos, who, according to Min, showed an eagerness very unlike the White Aja to have Rand drive Samael out of Ilion. A promise of that, a promise even to try, and Min would not be surprised to see Valinda offer him an oath of fealty. Mullane expressed disbelief, even rolling her eyes. She had never seen an Aes Sedai with that much sense, an attitude Rand found more than surprising, considering that she would probably laugh in his face if he asked for such an oath. Min maintained that it was true, though, whatever the other woman said. I will show them as much respect as I can without kneeling, Rand told Min when she finally ran down. From Elaine, he added, and until they show proof of goodwill, I'll trust them not one jot. He thought that should please them both, since each got what she wanted, but from the frowns he received, it pleased neither. After all that arguing, he half expected the pair to be at one another's throats. But it seemed that Mullane's pregnancy and Min's viewing had created a bond. When they stood, the women were all smiles and hugs, and Mullane said, I did not think I would like you, Min, but I do. And I will name one of the girls after you, because you knew of her first. I must go to tell Bale, so he will not be jealous that Randall Thor knew before him. May you always find water and shade, Min. To Rand, she added, watch these Aes Sedai closely, Randall Thor, and give Min your protection when she needs it. They will harm her if they learn she is sworn to you. Of course, she left with exactly the ceremony with which she had arrived, a nod of the head. Which left him alone with Min again, which felt awkward for some reason. Chapter 42. The Black Tower. Rand and Min stood looking at one another, not moving, until finally he said, would you like to come out to the farm with me? She gave a little start at the sound of his voice. The farm? It's a school, really, for the men who come for the amnesty. Min's face paled. No, I don't think... Marana will be waiting to hear from me, and I should let them know your rules as soon as possible. Any one of them could wander into the inner city without knowing, and you wouldn't want... I really ought to go. He did not understand. Without meeting even one of the students, she was afraid of them. Men who could channel, men who wanted to channel. In anyone else, it would have been understandable. But he could channel, and she was ready to rough his hair and poke his ribs and call him names to his face. Do you want an escort back to the Crown of Roses? There really are footpaths, even by daylight. Not many, but I would not like anything to happen to you. Her laugh was a bit unsteady. She truly was upset over the farm. I took care of myself while you were tending sheep, farm boy. Abruptly, she had a knife in either hand. A flourish, and they went back up her sleeves, not quite so smoothly as they had come out. In a much more sober tone, she said, you must take care of yourself, Rand. Rest. You look tired. Startlingly, she went a tiptoe and stretched her head up to brush his lips with a kiss. It is good to see you too, sheepherder. And with another laugh, this one delighted, she slipped out. Muttering to himself, Rand put his coat back on and went into his bedchamber to fetch his sword from the back of the wardrobe. A dark, rose-carved thing, tall enough and wide enough for 4 men's clothes. He really was turning into a randy goat. Min was just having her fun. He wondered how long she intended to keep teasing him for one slip of the tongue. A cloth bag of moderate size, clinking when he lifted it from under his stockings in a drawered chest inlaid with lapis, went into one coat pocket, and a much smaller velvet bag went in atop his angreal. The silversmith who had made the contents of the larger had been more than happy to work for the Dragon Reborn, and had tried to refuse payment for the honor of it. The goldsmith, who had made the single piece in the other bag, had required 4 times what Bashir said the work was worth, and a pair of maidens to stand over him until it was done. This trip to the farm had been in Rand's mind for some time already. He did not like Taim, and Lews Therin would surge around the man, but he could not go on avoiding the place, especially not now. So far as he knew, Taim had done well at keeping the students out of the city. At least Rand had heard of no incidents, and he would have. But news of Marana and the embassy would reach the farm eventually, by the supply carts or with new students. And in the way of rumors, 9 Aes Sedai would become 9 Red Sisters, or 90, hunting men to gentle. whether the result of that would be students running off in the night or students coming into Camelin to strike the first blow, he had to quell it before it began. Camelin held too many rumors of Aes Sedai already as it was, another reason he had planned to go out. Alana and Varen and the Two Rivers girls had grown into half the tower, by the word in the streets, and there were plenty of other tales of Aes Sedai sneaking into the city, sneaking through the gates in the night. That story of an Aes Sedai healing stray cats was so prevalent he could almost believe in her himself, but all Bashir's efforts to track the tale down provided as much substance as the tale that the women who escorted the Dragon Reborn everywhere were really Aes Sedai in disguise. Unconsciously, Rand turned, staring at a wall banded with white reliefs of lions and roses, staring beyond it. Alana was no longer at Kulain's hound. She was on edge. Had she not been Aes Sedai, he would have said her nerves were jagged. Once last night he had awakened, sure she was weeping. The feel had been that strong. Sometimes he almost found himself forgetting she was there, until something like her waking him happened. He supposed you really could grow used to anything. This morning Alana was eager as well. Eager seemed the best word. He would wager all of Camelin that the plumb line from his eyes to her ran straight to the crown of roses. He would wager Varen was with her. Not 9 Aes Sedai, 11. Lews Therin murmured uneasily. It was the sound of a man wondering whether his back was against a wall. Rand wondered too. 11 and 13 could take him as easily as scoop up a child, if he gave them the chance. Lews Therin began laughing softly, a hoarse, weeping sort of laugh. He had drifted again. For a moment, Rand considered Samara and Anila, then opened a gateway right there above the blue and gold patterned carpet in his bedchamber. Sullen as they were this morning, one of them was sure to blurt something before the visit to the farm was done, and remembering his previous visits, he did not want the students all looking over their shoulders for fear of 20 or so maidens. That sort of thing did little for a man's confidence, and they needed confidence if they were to survive. Taim was right on one point. Holding on to Saidin, a man knew he was alive, and it went beyond heightened senses. Despite the Dark One's taint, despite the feel of oily offal staining your bones, when the power was trying to melt you where you stood, freeze you till you shattered, when one misstep or one moment of weakness meant death, Light, you knew you were alive. Still, he pushed the source away as soon as he was through the gateway, and not only to rid himself of the taint before his stomach emptied itself. It seemed worse than it had been, more vile, if that was possible. His real reason for abandoning the power was that he did not think he dared face Taim with Saidin in him and Lews Therin in his head. The clearing was browner than he remembered, more leaves crackling under his boots and still fewer on the trees. Some of the pines were completely yellow, and a number of leather leaves stood dead, gray and bare. But if the clearing had changed, the farm was altered almost beyond recognition. The farmhouse looked in much better repair with its new thatch, and the barn had certainly been rebuilt entirely. It was much larger than before, and did not lean at all. Horses filled a large corral beside the barn, and the pens of cows and sheep had been moved farther away. The goats were penned now as well, and neat rows of coops held the chickens. The forest had been cleared back. Over a dozen long white tents made a row beyond the barn, and nearby stood the frames for 2 buildings much larger than the farmhouse, where a cluster of women sat outside doing their sewing and watching a score of children roll hoops and toss balls and play with dolls. The biggest change was the students, most in close-fitting, high-collared black coats, and few sweating. There must have been well over 100 of all ages. Rand had had no idea Taim's recruiting trips had gone this well. The feel of Saidin seemed to fill the air. Some men practiced weaves, setting fire to stumps, or shattering stones, or snaring each other in coils of air. Others channeled to haul water, the buckets gripped with air, or to push dung carts from the barn, or stack firewood. Not everyone was channeling. Henry Haslin had a line of bare-chested men under his eye, working the forms with practice swords. With only a fringe of white hair and a bulbous red nose, Haslin sweated more than his students and doubtless was wishing for his wine. But he watched and corrected as sharply as when he was master of the sword for the Queen's Guards. Sarek, a gray-haired red water Goshin, with no right hand, had two shirtless rows under his stony eyes.
Right back, everyone.
One was kicking as high as their heads, pivot and kick, then pivot and kick with the other foot, over and over. The other punched the air in front of them as fast as they could. All in all, it was a far cry from the pitiful handful Rand had seen the last time. A black-coated man just short of his middle years planted himself in front of Rand. He had a sharp nose and a sneering mouth. "And who are you?" he demanded in a Terraboner accent. "I suppose you have come to the Black Tower to learn, yes? You should have waited in Camelin for the wagon to bring you. You could have had another day to enjoy that fine coat." "I am Randall Thor," Rand said quietly. Quietly, so as not to let out a sudden surge of anger. Civility cost nothing, and if this fool did not decide it was cheap at the price soon... If anything, the sneer deepened. "So you are him, are you?" He looked Rand up and down insolently. "You do not look so grand to me. I think that I myself could..." A flow of air solidified just before it clipped him under the ear, and he collapsed in a heap. "Sometimes we need a hard discipline," Taim said, coming to stand over the man on the ground. His voice was almost jolly, but his dark tilted eyes stared close to murder at the man he had clubbed. "You cannot tell a man he has the power to make the earth shake, then expect him to walk small." The dragons climbing the sleeves of his black coat glittered in the sunlight. Thread of gold would do for the one, but what could make the blue shine so?
I'm just gonna have to skip it back a little bit.
Abruptly, he raised his voice. "Discipline, Taim. Civility cost nothing, and if this fool did not..." In front of Rand. Sarek, a gray-haired red water Goshin, with no right hand, had two shirtless rows under his stony eyes. One was kicking as high as their heads, pivot and kick, then pivot and kick with the other foot, over and over. The other punched the air in front of them as fast as they could. All in all, it was a far cry from the pitiful handful Rand had seen the last time. A black-coated man just short of his middle years planted himself in front of Rand. He had a sharp nose and a sneering mouth. "And who are you?" he demanded in a Terraboner accent. "I suppose you have come to the Black Tower to learn, yes? You should have waited in Camelin for the wagon to bring you. You could have had another day to enjoy that fine coat." "I am Randall Thor," Rand said quietly. Quietly, so as not to let out a sudden surge of anger. Civility cost nothing, and if this fool did not decide it was cheap at the price soon... If anything, the sneer deepened. "So you are him, are you?" He looked Rand up and down insolently. "You do not look so grand to me. I think that I myself could..." A flow of air solidified just before it clipped him under the ear, and he collapsed in a heap. "Sometimes we need a hard discipline," Taim said, coming to stand over the man on the ground. His voice was almost jolly, but his dark tilted eyes stared close to murder at the man he had clubbed. "You cannot tell a man he has the power to make the earth shake, then expect him to walk small." The dragons climbing the sleeves of his black coat glittered in the sunlight. Thread of gold would do for the one, but what could make the blue shine so? Abruptly, he raised his voice. "Kisman! Rochade! Drag Tolvar away, and douse him until he wakes. No healing, mind you. Maybe an aching head will teach him to mind his tongue." Two men in black coats, younger than Rand, came running and bent over Tolvar, then hesitated, glancing at Taim. After a moment, Rand felt Saidin fill them. Flows of air lifted a limp Tolvar, and the pair trotted away with him, floating between them. "I should have killed him long ago," Lews Therin panted. "I should have... There was a stretching toward the source. "No, burn you," Rand thought. No, you don't. You're only a bloody voice. With a fading wail, Lews Theron fled. Rand took a slow breath. Taim was looking at him, wearing that almost smile. You teach them healing? The little I know, first thing, even before how not to sweat to death in this weather. A weapon loses its utility if it's going to be laid up with the first wound. As it is, I have had one kill himself drawing too deeply and 3 burn themselves out. But no one has died from a sword yet. He managed to put a good deal of contempt into the word sword. I see, Rand said simply. 1 dead and 3 burned out. Did Aes Sedai lose that many in the tower? But then, they went slowly. They could afford to go slowly. What is this black tower the fellow was talking about? I don't like the sound of it, Taim. Lews Theron was mumbling and moaning again, just short of making words. The hawk-nosed man shrugged, studying the farm and the students with a proprietary pride. A name the students use. You could not go on calling this just the farm. They certainly did not feel right about it. They wanted something more. The Black Tower to balance the White Tower. He tilted his head, looking at Rand almost sideways. I can suppress it, if you wish. It is easy enough to take a word from men's lips. Rand hesitated. Easy enough to take a word from their lips, perhaps, but not from their minds. It did have to be called something. He had not thought of that. Why not the Black Tower? Though looking at the farmhouse and the framing, larger but only wood, the name did make him smile. Let it stand. Maybe the White Tower had begun as humbly. Not that the Black Tower would ever have time to grow into anything to rival the White. That erased his smile, and he looked at the children sadly. He was playing as much as they, pretending there was a chance of building something that might last. Assemble the students, Taim. I have a few things to say to them. He had come expecting to gather them around him, and then, seeing their numbers, maybe to speak from the back of the rickety cart that now seemed to have vanished. Taim had a platform for making addresses, though, a plain block of black stone, dressed and polished so finely that it shone like a mirror in the sunlight, with 2 steps cut into the back. It stood in an open area beyond the farmhouse, the ground beaten bare and flat and hard around it. The women and children gathered to one side to watch and listen. From the block, Rand had a chance to see clues to how far Taim's recruiting had ranged. Jahar Narishma, whom Taim had pointed out, the young man with the spark, had dark eyes as big as a girl's, a pale face filled with confidence, and hair in 2 long braids with silver bells on the ends. Actually, Taim had said he came from Arafel, but Rand recognized the Shinaran's shaved head and topknot on another man, and 2 with the transparent veils often worn by men and women alike in Taraban. There were tilted eyes from Saldaea and pale short fellows from Kyrian. One old man had a beard oiled and cut to a point in imitation of a tyrant lord, which he assuredly was not with that creased leathery face, and no fewer than 3 wore beards that left their upper lips bare. He hoped Taim had not roused Samael's interest by recruiting into Ilion. He had expected mainly younger men, but fresh faces like Ebon's and Fedwin's were balanced by gray or balding heads, some even more grizzled than Damer. Now that he thought of it, though, there was no mystery, no reason there should not be as many grandfathers who could be taught as boys. He did not know how to make speeches, but he had thought long and hard over what he wanted to say. Not the first part, but that was quickest done, with luck. You've all probably heard stories that the tower, the White Tower, has divided. Well, it's true. There are some rebel Aes Sedai who might just decide to follow me, and they've sent emissaries. 9 of them sitting in Caemlyn right now and waiting my pleasure. So when you hear about Aes Sedai in Caemlyn, don't believe any rumors. You know why they are here, and you can laugh in the face of the fellow with the rumor." There was no reaction. They just stood there staring up at him, hardly seeming to blink. Taim looked wry, very wry. Touching the larger bag in his pocket, Rand went on with the part he had labored over. "You need a name. In the old tongue, Aes Sedai means servants of all, or something very close. The old tongue doesn't translate easily. For himself, he knew only a few words, some from Osmodian, a handful from Moraine, some that had seeped through from Lews Therin. Bashir had provided what he needed, though. Another word in the old tongue is Ashaman. It means guardian, or guardians, or defender, and maybe a couple of other things. I told you the old tongue is very flexible. Guardian seems to be best, though. Not just any defender or guardian, though. You could not call a man who defended an unjust cause Ashaman, and never one that was evil. An Ashaman was a man who defended truth and justice and right for everyone. A guardian who would not yield even when hope was gone. The Light knew hope would go when Tarmon Gaidan came, if not before. That is what you are here to become. When you finish your training, you will be Ashaman." Murmurs rustled like leaves in a breeze, the name being repeated, but they died quickly. Attentive faces peered up at him. He could almost see ears pricking for his next words. At least that was a little better than before. The cloth bag gave off a faint clinking as he took it from his coat pocket. Aes Sedai begin as novices, then become accepted, then finally full Aes Sedai. You will have degrees too, but not like theirs. There will be no putting out or sending away among us. Send away? Light, he would do everything short of tying them hand and foot to stop anyone who wanted to go, if he could channel at all. When a man first comes to the Black Tower, he did not like that name. He will be called a soldier, because that is what he becomes when he joins us. What you all become. A soldier to fight the Shadow. And not just the Shadow, but anyone who opposes justice or oppresses the weak. When a soldier reaches a certain stage in his skills, he will be called dedicated and wear this. From the bag, he took one of the badges the silversmith had made. A small, gleaming silver sword, perfect with its long hilt and slanting quillons, and slightly curved blade. Taim? Taim walked to the block stiffly, and Rand bent to pin the silver sword to the tall collar of his coat. It seemed to shine even more brightly against the pitch-black wool. Taim's face had as much expression as the stone beneath Rand's boots. Rand handed him the bag, whispering, "Give these to whoever you think is ready. Just be sure they are." Straightening, he hoped there were enough. He really had not expected anywhere near so many men. Dedicated who advance their skill far enough will be called Ashaman, and they will wear this. Taking out the small velvet bag, he held up what it contained. Sunlight sparkled on finely crafted gold and rich red enamel, a sinuous form exactly like the one on the dragon banner. That went onto Taim's collar too, on the other side. So sword and dragon shone at the sides of his throat. "I suppose I was the first Ashaman," Rand told the students. "But Mazrim Taim is the second." Taim's face made stone look soft. What was wrong with the man? "I hope that all of you will become Ashaman eventually. But whether you do or not, remember that all of us are soldiers. There are many battles ahead. Maybe not always the ones we expect. And at the end, the last battle. The light sended is the last. If the light shines in us, we will win. We will win because we must win." There should have been some sort of cheer when he stopped. He did not take himself for the sort of speaker who could make men jump and shout, but these men knew why they were here. Telling them they would win should have produced something, however feeble. There was only silence. Rand jumped down from the stone block, and Taim snapped, "Disperse to lessons and chores." The students, the soldiers, went their ways almost as silently as they had stood, with only a murmur of quiet words. Taim motioned toward the farmhouse. He was holding the bag of sword pins so tightly it was a wonder none of them stabbed him through the cloth. "If my Lord Dragon has time for a cup of wine." Rand nodded. He wanted to get to the bottom of this before returning to the palace. The front room of the farmhouse was just what might be expected. A bare floor swept spotless, mismatched ladder-backed chairs arranged in front of a red brick fireplace, so clean it seemed impossible it had ever held a fire. A white cloth edged with embroidered flowers covered a small table. Sora Grady entered silently and set a wooden tray atop the cloth with a bright blue pitcher of wine and 2 white glazed mugs. Rand had thought her gaze would not hurt after all this time, but the accusation in her eyes made him glad when she left. She had been sweating, he realized. Taim tossed the bag onto the tray and emptied a mug straight away. "Don't you teach the women that trick of concentrating?" Rand asked. "It's cruel to make them sweat when their men don't." "Most want no part of it," Taim said curtly. "Their husbands and sweethearts try to teach them, but most refuse even to listen. It might have to do with Saidin, you see." Rand peered into his mug at the dark wine. He had to feel his way here. No blowing up just because irritation prickled. "I'm pleased to see the recruiting going so well. You said you'd match the tower, the White Tower." White Tower, Black Tower. What would the stories make of that, if there were any? "In less than a year. And if you keep on at this rate, you will. I don't see how you find so many." "Sift enough sand," Taim said stiffly, "and you will find a few grains of gold eventually. I leave that to others now, except for a trip or two. Damer, Grady, there are a dozen men I can trust alone for a day. They have enough years not to do anything stupid. And there are enough younger men with the strength to make a gateway, if not much more, to accompany the older who don't. You will have your 1,000 before the year. What of those I send on to Camelin? Have you made an army of them yet? You have your 1,000 there, and time's over." "I leave that to Bashir," Rand said quietly. Taim's mouth quirked derisively, and Rand set his mug down before it could break in his grip. Bashir was making what he could of them, he understood, in a camp somewhere west of the city. What he could, considering that they were, as the Saldaean put it, a ragtag collection of penniless farmers, runaway apprentices, and failed craftsmen who had never held a sword, ridden a horse with a saddle, or been more than 5 miles from where they were born. Rand had too much to concern him to worry about the likes of that. He had told Bashir to do what he wanted with them, and not bother him unless they ran riot. Looking at Taim, who was making no effort to hide his disdain, he stuck his hands behind his back, where they clenched into fists. Lews Theron rumbled in the distance, an echo of his anger. "What has gotten into you? You've had a burr in your britches ever since I put those badges on you. Is it something to do with them? If so, I don't understand. Those men will think more of theirs for seeing you receive yours from the Dragon Reborn. For that matter, they'll think more of you for it. Maybe you won't have to keep discipline by clubbing men over the head. But what have you to say?" That began well enough, in a calm tone, if not exactly mild. He had not intended it to be mild. But along the way, his voice grew firmer and louder. Not to a shout, yet that final question cracked like a whip. The most remarkable transformation came over the other man. Taim shook visibly. With rage, Rand would have said, not fear. But when the shaking stopped, he was his old self again. Not friendly, certainly. A touch mocking, but very much relaxed and in control of himself. "Since you must know, what worries me are Aes Sedai and you. 9 Aes Sedai came to Camelin, plus 2 make 11. Then there might just be 1 or 2 more. I haven't been able to find them yet, but... I told you to stay out of the city, Rand said flatly. I found a few men to ask questions for me. Taim's tone was dry as dust. I've been no closer than here since I saved you from that gray man. Rand let that pass. Barely. Almost. The voice in his head was too low to be understood, but cold thunder for that. They'll catch smoke with their fingers before they catch rumors. That came out with all the contempt he felt. Taim had saved him? And the man jerked. Outwardly, he still appeared at ease, yet his eyes could have been dark gemstones. And if they join with the Red Aes Sedai? His voice was cool and amused, but his eyes glittered. There are Red Sisters in the countryside. Several parties of them. Arrived in the last few days, trying to intercept men coming here. I will kill him, Lews Therin shouted, and Rand felt that fumbling reach toward Saidin. Go away, he said firmly. The fumbling continued, and so did the voice.
I'll be right back, everyone.
I will kill him, and then them. They must serve him. It is plain. They must serve him. Go away, Rand shouted back silently. You are nothing but a voice. Stretching toward the source. Oh, right, I killed them all that I loved. If I kill him, it will be well enough, though. I can make it up if I kill him finally. No, nothing can make it up. But I must kill him anyway. Kill them all. I must. No, Rand screamed inside his head. You're dead, Lews Therin. I am alive, burn you, and you are dead. You are dead. Abruptly, he realized he was leaning on the table, holding himself up with sagging knees, and muttering, You are dead. I am alive, and you are dead. But he had not seized Saidin, and neither had Lews Therin. Shivering, he looked at Taim, and was surprised to see concern in the man's face. You must hold on, Taim said. The price is too high if you fail. I won't fail, Rand said, pushing himself upright. Lews Therin was silent. There seemed to be nothing in his head but himself, and the feel of Alana, of course. Have these Reds taken anyone? Not that I have heard. Taim was watching him cautiously, as if he expected another outburst. Most of the students come through gateways now, and with all the people on the roads, it cannot be easy to pick out a man heading here unless he talks too freely. He paused. They could be disposed of easily enough in any case. No! Was Lews Therin really gone? He wished it, and knew he would be a fool to believe. If they start taking men, I'll have to do something, but as it is, they're no threat out in the country. And believe me, nobody Elida sends is likely to join those Aes Sedai in the city. Either lot would probably welcome you before they did each other. What about those who are not in the countryside? 11 of them? A few accidents could reduce that to a much safer number. If you don't want to soil your own hands, I am willing to... No! How many times do I have to say no? If I feel a man channeling Camelin, I will come for you, Taim. I swear I will. And don't think you can stay far enough from the palace that I won't feel it and be safe. If one of those Aes Sedai keels over dead for no reason, I will know who to blame. Mark me. You set wide boundaries, Taim said dryly. If Samael or Demandred decides to taunt you with a few dead Aes Sedai on your doorstep, my veins are opened? They haven't so far, and you had better hope they do not start. Mark me, I say. I hear, my Lord Dragon, and obey, of course. The hawk-nosed man bowed slightly. But I still say 11 is a dangerous number. Rand laughed in spite of himself. Taim, I intend to teach them to dance to my flute. Light, how long since he had played the flute? Where was his flute?
Excuse me.
Faintly, he heard Luz Theron chuckling.
Chapter 43. The Crown of Roses. Marana's hired coach swayed its slow way through the densely packed streets toward the Crown of Roses. Outwardly, she was calm, at least. A dark-haired woman with cool hazel eyes, slim-fingered hands folded peacefully on her pale gray silk skirts. Inside, she was not so serene. 38 years ago, she had been in place by chance to negotiate a treaty between Arad Doman and Tarabon that was supposed to put an end to the squabbling over Almouth Plain, with Domani and Taraboners dodging at every turn, and 3 times nearly starting a war in the middle of the exchanges, and all the while maintaining smiling faces of utter goodwill. By the time the signatures were dry, she felt as if she had been rolled over rough hills in a barrel full of splinters, and after all that, the treaty turned out to be worth considerably less than the wax and ribbons for its seals. She hoped what she had begun this afternoon at the Royal Palace ended better. It had to. But inside, she felt as though she had just climbed out of another barrel. Min was sitting back with her eyes closed. The young woman seemed to take catnaps any time an Aes Sedai was not actually speaking to her. The other 2 sisters in the coach occasionally shot quick glances at the girl. Cyanid, cool and reserved in her brocaded green. Masuri, slim and merry-eyed in brown embroidered with flowering vines around the hem. They had all dressed formally, in shawls and Aja colors. Marana was sure they had the same thought as herself when they looked at Min. Cyanid could certainly understand, though who could be certain? Cyanid was very methodical and practical about her warders, almost like a woman with a pair of prize wolfhounds she felt some affection for. Masura might understand. She did like to dance and even flirt, though she was liable to forget the poor man when she heard a rumor of an old manuscript hidden away. Marana herself had not been in love since well before that 5th Treaty of Falma, but she did remember, and all that had taken was one glimpse of Min staring at Althor to see a woman who had tossed sense out the window and was riding her heart at a gallop. Not proof that Min had ignored all their cautions, broken her promise, and told Althor everything, but he knew about Salidar. He knew Elaine was there, and had been amused at their evasions. Aside from whether Min had broken confidence, care would have to be used in what was said around her from now on in any case. It was frightening when taken with everything else. Marana was not used to being frightened. She had been often in the year after Basin died. She had never bonded another warder, at least partly because she did not want to go through that again, and also partly because she was simply too busy to search out the right man. But that was the last time she had known anything more than apprehension before the Aiel War. Now she felt fear, and she did not like it. Everything could still go well, nothing truly disastrous had happened, but Althor himself turned her knees to water. The hired coach rocked to a stop in the stable yard of the Crown of Roses. Stablemen in vests worked with roses, rushing out to take bridles and open doors. The common rooms suited the 3 stories of finely dressed white stone, all dark polished panels, with tall fireplaces faced in white marble. One mantelpiece held a wide clock, with chimes for the hours and a few lines of gilding. The serving women wore blue dresses and white aprons embroidered with a ring of roses. They were all smiling, polite, efficient, and those not pretty were handsome. The Crown of Roses was a favorite of nobles in from the country who had no mansions of their own in Camelin, but now the tables held only warders, and Alana and Varen seated at the rear. Had Marana had her wishes, they would have been waiting in the kitchens with the servants. The rest of the sisters were all out. There was no time to waste. "If you don't mind," Min said, "I would like to walk around. I'd like to see some of Camelin before dark." Marana gave her assent, and as the young woman darted back outside, exchanged looks with Cyanid and Masuri, wondering how long it would take Min to return to the palace. Mistress Cinchonine appeared at once, as round as any innkeeper Marana had ever seen, bobbing bows and dry-washing her pink hands. "Is there anything I can do for you, Aes Sedai? Anything I can fetch?" She had accommodated Marana often, and well, both before and after learning she was Aes Sedai. "Berry tea," Marana told her, smiling, "in the private sitting room upstairs." The smile went as the innkeeper scurried away, calling for one of the serving women. Marana motioned sharply for Alana and Varen to join her on the stairs, and the 5 of them climbed in silence. The sitting room windows gave a good view of the street for those who wished it, which Marana did not particularly. She pulled in the windows that were open to shut out some of the noise, and turned her back on them. Sionid and Masuri had taken chairs. Alana and Varen remained standing between the other two. Varen's dark wool dress had an air of being rumpled, though it was not, and she had an ink stain on the tip of her nose, but her eyes were bird-like, sharp and watchful. Alana's eyes shone too, but very likely with anger, and now and then her hands quivered slightly, gripping the skirts of her yellow-bodiced blue silk dress. It looked as if she had slept in it. There was some excuse for her, of course. Some, but not enough. "I do not know yet, Alana," Marana said firmly, "whether your actions have had any adverse effect. He did not bring up your bonding him against his will, but he was sharp, very sharp, and—" "Has he set further restrictions?" Varen broke in, tilting her head slightly. "All seems to be going well, to me. He did not fly away at news of you. He has received 3, in some courtesy, at least, or you would be at Sunderheads. He is a little frightened of us, which is to the good, or he would not have set limits. But unless he has set more, we still have as much freedom as before, so he is not terrified. Above all, we must not frighten him too far." The difficulty was that Varen and Alana were not part of Marana's delegation. She had no authority over them. They had heard the news of Loghain and the Reds, and agreed that Elaida could not be allowed to remain in the Amerlin seat, yet that meant nothing. Of course, Alana was not really a problem, only potentially. She and Marana were so close in strength that the only way to say which had the greater would be an actual contest, the sort of thing novices did until they were caught. Alana had been 6 years a novice, Marana only 5, but more importantly, Marana had been Aes Sedai 10 years the day the midwife laid Alana at her mother's breast. That took care of that. Marana had precedence. No one actually thought in those terms unless something made them, but they both knew and adjusted automatically. Not that Alana would take orders, yet instinctive deference would surely keep her in hand to some degree. That, and knowing what she had done. Varen was the problem, the one who had Marana thinking of strengths and precedence. Marana let herself sense the other woman's strength and the power again, though of course she knew what she would find. No way to tell which of them was stronger. 5 years as novice for each, 6 as accepted. That was one thing every Aes Sedai knew about every other if she knew nothing else. The difference was that Varen was older, maybe almost as much older than she as she was older than Alana. The touch of gray in Varen's hair emphasized it. Had Varen been part of the embassy, there would have been no difficulty at all, but she was not, and Marana found herself listening attentively, deferring without thinking. Twice in the morning she'd had to remind herself that Varen was not in charge. The only thing that made the situation tolerable was that Varen must feel she shared some of Alana's guilt. Without that, she surely would have been in a chair as soon as anyone else, not standing beside Alana. If only there were some way to make her remain at Culain's Hound day and night to watch over that wonderful treasure of girls from the 2 rivers. Seating herself so she,
cheers,
Sionid,
Chris.
and Masuri surrounded the pair, Marana adjusted her skirts and shawl carefully. There was some moral ascendancy in being seated while the others remained standing. To her, what Alana had done was little short of rape. In fact, he has placed another restriction. It is all very well that you two have located his school, But now I strongly suggest you abandon whatever thoughts you may have had in that direction. He has charged us to stay away from his men. She could see him still, leaning forward in that monstrosity of a throne with the lion throne on exhibit behind him and a carved piece of spear in his fist. No doubt an Aiel custom, that. "Hear me, Marana Sedai," he said, quite pleasantly and quite firmly. "I want no trouble between Aes Sedai and Ashaman. I have told the soldiers to stay clear of you, but I do not mean them to be Aes Sedai meat. If you go hunting at the Black Tower, you may be dinner yourself. We both want to avoid that." Marana had been Aes Sedai long enough not to shiver every time a goose walked over her grave, but it was close this time. Ashaman, the Black Tower, Mazrim Time. How could it have gone so far? Yet Alana was certain there were over 100 men, though she gave no details of how she knew, of course. No sister willingly exposed her eyes and ears. It did not matter. If you pursue 2 hares, both will escape you, the old saying went. And Althor was the most important hare in the world. The others had to wait. Is he still here, or has he gone? Varen and Alana seemed to take it very calmly that Althor apparently could travel. It still made Marana a trifle queasy. What else had he taught himself that Aes Sedai had forgotten? Alana? Alana! The slender green sister jerked, pulling herself back from wherever her mind had been. She seemed to drift quite often. "He is in the city. In the palace, I think." She still sounded a little dreamy. He has a wound in his side. An old wound, yet only half healed. Every time I let myself dwell on it, I want to weep. How can he live with it? Cyanid gave her a sharp look. Any woman who had a warder had felt his injuries, but she knew what Alana was going through, having lost Owen, and when she spoke, her voice was almost gentle, and only a little brisk. "Why, Terrell and Furin have taken wounds that almost made me faint, even feeling them as softly as we do, and they never slowed a step, not one step." "I think," Masuri said quietly, "we are going afield." She always spoke quietly, but unlike many Browns, always to the point. Marana nodded. "Yes, I considered taking Moiraine's place with him." A rap at the door announced a white-aproned woman with the tea tray, a silver teapot and porcelain cups. The Crown and Rose was used to the nobility. By the time the tray was settled and the serving woman gone, Alana was no longer dreamy. Her dark eyes flashed with all the fire Marana had ever seen in them. Greens, particularly, were jealous of their warders, and Althor belonged to her now, however she had bonded him. Deference went down the well when it came to that. Straight as a blade she stood, just waiting for Marana's next words to see whether to slash and cut. Still, Marana waited until the blueberry tea was poured and everyone back in her chair. She even told Varen and Alana the fool woman deserved a little upset, even atop Owen. Maybe it was not short of rape at all. "I considered it," she went on at last, "and rejected it. I might have done so if you had not done what you did, Alana. But he is so suspicious of Aes Sedai now that he might well laugh in my face if I suggested it." "He is as arrogant as any king," Cyanid said curtly. "Everything Elaine and Nynaeve said, and more," Masuri added, shaking her head, "claiming that he knows when a woman channels. I almost embraced Saidar to show him he was mistaken, but of course whatever I did to show him might have alarmed him too much. All those Aiel..." Cyanid's voice was tight. She was Cairhienan. "Men and women. I think they would have tried to spear us if we blinked too quickly. One, a sun-haired woman who was at least wearing skirts, made no effort at all to hide her dislike." At times, Marana thought, Cyanid did not fully realize that Althor himself might be a danger. Alana unconsciously began chewing her underlip like a girl. It was good she had Varen to take care of her. She was not fit to be out alone in her state. Varen merely sipped her tea and watched. Varen's eyes could be most disconcerting. Marana found herself relenting. She remembered too well the fragile bundle of nerves she had been after Baron. Fortunately, it seems there may be a good side to his suspicion. He has received emissaries from Elida in Cairn. He was quite open about it. Suspicion will make him keep them at a long arm's length, I believe. Sionid rested her cup in its saucer. He thinks to play us one against the other. And he might still, Masuri said dryly. Except that we know more of him than Elida possibly can. I think she must have sent her envoys to meet a shepherd, if a shepherd in a silk coat. Whatever he is no longer that. Moiraine taught him well, it seems. We were forearmed, Marana said. I think it unlikely they were. Alana stared at them, blinking. Then I have not ruined everything? They all three nodded, and she took a deep breath, then smoothed at her skirts with a frown, as if just noticing the wrinkles. I may yet be able to make him accept me. The wrinkles were abandoned, and her face and voice became calmer and more confident by the word. As for his amnesty, we may have to hold any plans in abeyance, but that doesn't mean we should not make them. That sort of danger cannot be ignored. For a moment, Marana regretted her relenting. The woman had done that to a man, and all that truly worried her was whether it damaged their chance of success. Reluctantly, though, she admitted that had it made Althor biddable, she would have held her nose and her tongue. First, we must bring Althor to heel, so to speak. The abeyance will last as long as it must, Alana. Alana's mouth tightened, but after a moment she nodded in acquiescence, or at least assent. And how is he to be brought to heel? Varen asked. He must be handled delicately. A wolf on a leash 1 thread thick. Marana hesitated. She had not meant to share everything with this pair, who had only the most tenuous allegiance to the hall in Salidar. She dreaded what would happen if Varen tried to take over here, if in fact she did manage to take over. She herself knew how to handle this. She had been chosen because of a lifetime spent mediating sensitive disputes, negotiating treaties where the hatreds seemed implacable. That agreements were broken eventually and treaties violated was the nature of humanity. Yet in 46 years, the 5th Treaty of Falma was her only real failure. She knew all of that, but all of those years had ingrained some instincts deeply. We are approaching certain nobles, who by good luck are all in Caemlyn now. My worry is Elaine, Dylan said firmly. The more firmly for being alone in the sitting room with an Aes Sedai. Aes Sedai could press hard if you weakened when you were alone, especially when no one else knew you were alone with her. Karen Sedai smiled, but neither smile nor cool blue eyes gave away anything. It is quite possible the daughter heir will yet be found to sit on the Lion Throne. What may seem insurmountable to others is seldom so to Aes Sedai. The Dragon Reborn says, men say many things, Lady Dylan, but you know I do not lie.
Luan patted the Tyrant Stallion's gray neck, looking both ways in case one of the grooms came into the stables, and barely dodged a bite from wicked teeth. Rafella's warder would give warning, but Luan was not sure he trusted anyone of late. Especially not with a visit of this sort. I am not sure I understand, he said curtly. Unity is better than division, Rafella said. Peace better than war. Patience better than death. Luan's head jerked at the odd end to the platitudes, and the round-faced Aes Sedai smiled. Will Andor not be better off if Randalthor leaves the land in peace and unity, Lord Luan?
Holding her robe shut, Elorian stared at the Aes Sedai who had managed to reach her in her bath without being announced, possibly without being seen. The coppery-skinned woman looked back from the stool on the other side of the marble tub full of water as though this were all natural and ordinary. Who, Elorian asked finally, would have the Lion Throne then, Demira Sedai? The wheel weaves as the wheel wills, was the reply, and Elorian knew she would get no other.
Chapter 44. The Color of Trust. Once Vannon had gone to tell the band to sit tight, Matt found that not an inn remained in Saladar, but was taken over by Aes Sedai, and the 5 stables were all full to bursting. Yet when he slipped a little silver to a narrow-jawed stableman, the fellow had the sacks of oats and bales of hay shifted from a stone-walled yard that was fine for 6 horses. He also showed Matt and the remaining 4 men of the band places to sleep in the loft, which was little cooler than anywhere else. "Ask for nothing," Matt told his men as he divided the rest of his coins among them. "Pay for everything and accept no gifts. The band isn't going to be beholden to anybody here." His false air of confidence communicated itself to them, and they did not even hesitate when he ordered them to fix the banners out the loft door, so they hung down in front of the stable, crimson and white, the black and white disc, and the dragon plain to everybody.
Alright, everyone, I'm gonna call into this live for tonight. But I want to thank everyone for stopping by and everyone who continues to stop by. I definitely appreciate all y'all's support.